Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to a deep dive that's going to take us way back to the very roots of the English language. We're exploring the incredible world of Old English literature.
Yeah, we're talking about the period roughly from, say, 449 AD, with the Germanic tribes arriving.
Right, all the way up to 1066 and the Norman Conquest. Quite a stretch.
It is, and we've really been digging into the sources for this one. Research papers, historical accounts, literary analysis, trying to get a handle on English origins, those huge cultural shifts in early Britain.
And the literature itself, the amazing stuff that somehow survived all this time.
Exactly.
So our mission today, we really want to understand how all that upheaval, the wars, the invasions, actually shaped what got written down and what that earliest English poetry actually sounded like, felt like. And of course, we have to spend some quality time with the big one, the most famous survivor, Beowulf.
Ah.
Honestly, just getting into this material, exploring this ancient layer of our language is genuinely exciting.
It really is, because when you look at the sources, you see this dynamic connection between history, how the language was changing, and just that basic human need to tell stories.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how the movement of people, the conflicts, new beliefs creeping in, how it all left a mark on the words that were actually preserved. Makes you appreciate the language we use now even more, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And thinking about preserving words, the first thing that really jumps out from the sources is how the geography changed, like where literature was being made and copied. It moved around quite a bit during the Old English period. It wasn't static.
No, not at all. That's a really key insight from this material. Initially, the sources show the main centers for literary production, monasteries, scriptoriums. They were mostly up in the northeast of what's now England, think Northumbria. Big cultural hotspot early on.
But that northern center didn't hold, did it? And the sources seem pretty clear on why things shifted.
They are. The main drivers were, well, constant warfare, but also, critically, those Scandinavian invasions, the Viking Age, starting late 8th century.
Right, the Vikings. Raids, settlements. That must have created huge instability, especially up north and east.
Exactly. And if you're trying to protect, fragile manuscripts in monasteries, which were prime targets, you're going to look for safer ground.
Makes sense.
So the sources describe this gradual move south. From Northumbria, the focus shifted down into Mercia, another big kingdom in the middle of England. But even Mercia faced challenges later on, from West Saxon power and more Viking trouble.
And by the 9th century, the sources show things had settled much further south and west.
Precisely. By King Alfred's time, late 9th century, the West Saxon kingdom down in the southwest was really the dominant force, politically and culturally. And this had a huge kind of accidental impact on what literature survived.
How so? What was the impact?
Well, because the West Saxon dialect basically became the standard written form in that later period. Most of the earlier poems, we have poems maybe first composed in Northern or Mercian dialects, they only survived because West Saxon scribes copied them.
Wow.
And often they copied them into their own West Saxon dialect.
So the survival of these ancient poems, our window into their world, it literally depended on who was copying them, where, and in which dialect, maybe centuries after they were first told.
Yeah.
Well, that's a powerful reminder of how fragile this stuff is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Makes you appreciate the few texts we do have even more.
It really does. And it means what we have is kind of filtered through that West Saxon lens.
Yeah.
We undoubtedly lost a lot from those earlier times and places.
Okay, so thinking about those texts that did survive, thanks to those West Saxon scribes, let's talk about the poetry itself. Have you ever heard Old English poetry read aloud? It's quite something. It sounds so different from modern English verse. The sources point to some key techniques that give it that unique feel.
It was built on different principles, not like later rhyme and meter were used to. The first big one the sources discuss is alliteration.
Okay, alliteration. We know that today Peter Piper picked stuff like that, but wasn't just playing with words in Old English, was it?
Not at all. It was fundamental, absolutely core to how the line was structured. Old English poetry works on a 4-stress line, split in the middle. The alliteration is what links the two halves. It repeats the same starting consonant sound on the important stressed syllables, usually 2 in the first half, 1 in the second.
So it wasn't just decoration, it was the rhythm, the meter.
Exactly. It gave the poetry this strong, driving, almost percussive beat. It was designed for performance, maybe with a harp accompaniment.
You can almost hear it.
You can, and the sources give good examples. Some phrases even echo down to us, like might and main or friend and foe. You feel that emphasis on the first sound.
Right, and the second big device What else made it distinctive?
That would be kennings. Kennings are one of the really fun, evocative parts of Old English poetry.
Kiddings. Okay, explain that one.
A kenning is basically a kind of compact metaphor, often a compound phrase used instead of a simple noun, usually two nouns jammed together. It creates this vivid image, sometimes like a little riddle, packs a lot of meaning into a short phrase.
Okay, examples always help with this stuff. What are some classic kennings the sources mention?
Oh, there are loads. Instead of just saying the sea, a poet might use whale path or swan road.
Whale path. I like that.
Yeah, it evokes movement, life, or for the sun, you get beautiful ones like sky's candle or heaven's jewel. A ship could be a sea steed.
Sky's candle is lovely. And the source mentioned Burl's guardian for a dragon. That instantly paints a picture, doesn't it? A creature curled around treasure.
Exactly. And these weren't just, fancy flourishes. The sources point out that alliteration and especially kennings were really fundamental to the oral tradition behind a lot of this poetry. They were tools for the poet composing on the spot, remembering long tales, and for the audience, too.
Memory aids, almost.
Sort of, yeah. And the sheer number of compound words in Beowulf, for instance, the source notes over 1,000 in about 3,000 lines, shows just how common kennings were.
That makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like building blocks for spoken performance. Okay, so given that context, where it was written, how it was structured, what it sounded like, let's focus on the most famous example, Beowulf.
The big one, the cornerstone for most people.
Our sources lay out some key facts about this epic. First off, when was it probably composed?
The general agreement, based on the material we looked at, points to around the 8th century. That's when it's thought the poem as we know it was likely written down, probably drawing on older oral stories.
But the actual manuscript we have is later.
Much later, yes. The only surviving manuscript of Beowulf dates from the 10th century.
Wow.
And connecting back to what we said earlier, because it was saved in Wessex, it's written in the West Saxon dialect.
So the single thread connecting us to this massive poem is one copy, made maybe 200 years after it's composed, in a dialect that became dominant partly by accident. That's remarkable.
It is.
And where's this precious manuscript now?
It's safe in the British Library in London. It even survived a fire back in the 18th century, which just highlights again how close we came to losing it completely.
Gives you chills. So what makes Beowulf so important, globally speaking?
The sources really stress its unique position. It's described as the oldest, longest, basically complete literary work we have from the whole Anglo-Saxon period. It's seen as Europe's earliest major epic in a vernacular language, not Latin, and it's often ranked up there with huge epics like France's Song of Roland or Germany's Nibelungenlied.
That's elite company.
Absolutely.
And the author. Any clues?
Frustratingly, no. Completely anonymous. The sources suggest it was likely a single poet, probably working in that 8th century period, maybe somewhere in Northumbria or Mercia, before the big shift south. Clearly someone very skilled, very learned, and crucially someone who seems to be blending those older pagan heroic traditions with the newer Christian ideas spreading through England then.
That blend. Yeah, we definitely need to unpack that. But first, maybe a quick plot summary of Beowulf for anyone not familiar.
Good idea. So the poem is about the hero Beowulf. Interestingly, he's not Anglo-Saxon himself. He's a Geat from southern Sweden.
And the main action happens where?
The first, most famous part is set in Denmark at the great mead hall of King Hrothgar. Heorot.
And Hrothgar's got a problem, right? A big one.
He does. His hall and his men are being terrorized nightly by a monstrous creature called Grendel.
Nasty.
Very. Beowulf hears about it, sails over with his warband, and famously takes on Grendel barehanded in the hall and fatally wounds him.
But that's not the end of the monster trouble.
No, because then Grendel's mother shows up, seeking revenge. She's arguably even more terrifying.
Uh-oh.
Beowulf has to track her down to her lair, this creepy underwater cave, and fight her there. Another huge battle.
So he saves the Danes twice over. What happens next? Does he stay?
No, he returns home to Geatland, receives rewards, and eventually becomes king of his own people. The poem says he rules well for 50 years.
50 years. That's a good long reign.
It is. But his final challenge comes in old age. A fire-breathing dragon is disturbed when someone steals from its treasure hoard and it starts attacking his kingdom.
A dragon.
Yeah.
The ultimate epic foe. And this is Beowulf's last battle.
His last. He goes to fight it. It's incredibly fierce. He needs help from one loyal young warrior, Wiglaf, to finally kill the dragon. But Beowulf himself is mortally wounded in the fight. Dragon's venom maybe burns. The poem isn't totally specific,
Huh?
and the poem ends with his death, his funeral pyre, and his people mourning their great king, fearing for the future without him.
Wow. Monsters, battles, loyalty, heroic death. It's got it all.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
you mentioned Beowulf is Swedish, the action's in Denmark. So why is this considered such a cornerstone of Anglo-Saxon literature?
That's a really crucial point the sources emphasize. While the setting, the characters, maybe even some core myths are Scandinavian, possibly drawing on real figures or legends from Sweden and Denmark, like the Beo meaning bear and wolf wolf idea. The poem as we have it was written down in Anglo-Saxon England by an Anglo-Saxon poet for an Anglo-Saxon audience.
So it tells us more about their world.
Exactly. The sources stress that despite the setting, Beowulf is this incredibly vivid reflection of Anglo-Saxon life, their values, their social structures, their worldview back in the 8th century. It's like a window into what mattered to the people who told, listened to, and eventually wrote down this story.
Okay, let's open that window a bit wider.
Yeah.
What kind of values, what ideals do the sources say are central to Beowulf and by extension to Anglo-Saxon society?
Well, the big ones that come through loud and clear are clan loyalty, individual courage, and the warrior ideal. The bond between a lord and his warriors, the comitatus, is absolutely vital. Loyalty to your king, your family, standing by your people, that's paramount.
Loyalty, got it.
Then there's courage. Bravery in the face of, well, terrifying odds, monsters, death. It's constantly praised. And tied to that is the desire for lof, praise, glory, fame. Doing great deeds so your name lives on after you die. That was a kind of immortality in their worldview.
Loyalty, courage, seeking fame.
Yeah, that paints a picture of a world where your place, your survival, depended on the group and your actions within it.
Definitely.
And you mentioned the poet might have been Christian. How does that square with a story that seems rooted in pagan history, with monsters and fate?
This is probably the most fascinating aspect, and the sources really delve into this balancing act. Beowulf clearly draws on centuries of Germanic pagan tradition. You got the monsters, the dragon, the emphasis on fate or weird, the warrior code, the funeral pyre. But it was written down and preserved after Christianity had become pretty influential in England.
And the poet managed to weave them together somehow.
Very skillfully, it seems. The Christian elements aren't just crudely pasted on. They're integrated in ways that an audience familiar with both traditions could understand. Like Grendel, he isn't just some random monster. He's explicitly called a descendant of Cain from the Bible, the first murderer.
Ah, right. So that immediately puts him in a Christian framework of evil. Exactly. And the dragon, hoarding gold, cut off from society. It's easy for a Christian audience to see it as a symbol of Satan, maybe, or greed, worldly temptation.
And Beowulf himself. Is he seen in Christian terms?
Some interpretations, yeah, which the sources mention, see his final battle sacrificing himself to save his people from the dragon as having echoes of Christ's victory over Satan. Beowulf, this figure who comes from afar to save people, there's maybe a kind of savior spirit about him that could resonate with Christian ideas.
So it's this ancient, heroic, maybe pagan story, but told through the lens of a world that's becoming Christian. Not quite one or the other.
Precisely. It's not a history lesson. It's not a sermon. It's a story reflecting a society in transition where these different belief systems were coexisting, maybe sometimes uneasily.
The complex blend, that's what makes it so valuable, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's not just a great adventure story. It's this priceless literary snapshot of Anglo-Saxon England grappling with its past and its future, its old ways and its new faith.
It really is incredible how much one poem, saved almost by chance, can tell us. So, just to recap our deep dive here, we've seen how geography mattered, how wars and invasions shifted literary production south, meaning West Saxon scribes became gatekeepers for what survived. We've touched on the unique sound of the poetry, the driving alliteration, and those vivid kennings being key structural elements, not just decoration.
Yeah, built for the ear.
And we've zoomed in on Beowulf. Got the key facts: 8th century composition, 10th century manuscript, West Saxon dialect, British Library.
Yeah.
Understood its story comes from Scandinavian roots, but reflects Anglo-Saxon culture, especially that fascinating mix of the pagan warrior code and emerging Christian ideas.
It really highlights the power of these foundational stories, doesn't it? They seem ancient, alien maybe, with the monsters and mead halls, but they grapple with things we still understand: courage, loyalty, fighting against chaos, what it means to be a hero. They still connect.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it? If Beowulf's monsters, like Grendel, and his heroes revealed the deepest values and fears of the Anglo-Saxons, what do the stories we tell today about our heroes and monsters reveal about our own time? What are our Grendels? What values do our heroes embody? Something to mull on.
Definitely something to think about.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Join us next time as we continue exploring the roots of English by looking at the Germanic contributions to English.
Looking forward to it.
Don't miss it.